Welcome, everyone, to the Collective Healing Conference preview event. My name is Robin Alfred. You may recognize me as one of the hosts from the 5 past Collective Trauma Summits, and I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be here hosting this event today. A few quick technical announcements before we get started. If you're joining us in Zoom, you may turn on closed captions in Zoom by clicking the live transcript/CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, click more, and then you'll find the CC button there. If you're watching on YouTube, closed captions are automatically on. You cannot switch them off. Please note that live captions are auto-generated, and so there will be some imperfections in that. Edited subtitles will be added in a few days. If you have technical issues or questions, please email onlinecoursesupport@thomashübl.com. And now to introduce Thomas Hübl, the instigator and convener of the conference. For those of you who don't know Thomas, he's a teacher, author, international facilitator whose lifelong work integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. We might call that the marriage of inner and outer science. Since the early 2000s, he's been leading large-scale events and courses that focus on the healing and integration of trauma. He's worked with tens of thousands of people worldwide through workshops, multi-year training programs, online courses, and he's also the author of a couple of wonderful books on the themes. One is called Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World, and the other, Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. So this is the 6th iteration of the Collective Trauma Summit that Thomas has convened. And this year, you'll have noticed we're evolving that into the Collective Healing Conference. And I'm sure that's one of the transitions that we'll also be reflecting on in our panel discussion later. We will gather together for 8 days to explore trauma-informed pathways for personal and collective healing. And this year, we're also offering an optional upgrade experience with what we're calling an all-access pass. That includes 9 live additional workshops with Thomas and other conference teachers for a fully immersive experience. I'll be telling you more about that towards the end of the call. So I'm now very pleased to pass it over to you, Thomas, to share more about the upcoming conference, and then we'll have a panel conversation after that. So over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, and warm welcome from my side. This is, as Robin said, our 6th year. And yeah, this year we wanna, as you can, the ones who joined us earlier on, the ones that joined us earlier on know we had the Collective Trauma Summit. And why do we call it Collective Healing Conference this year? One goal we had in the last years was to say, okay, we want, because I was working for 20 years on collective trauma fields globally, and I thought, okay, I think it's like a summit and bringing many people together. I always call it, if you want to create a movement, you need to gather your tribe, which means find people that resonate in their body of work in different ways with your core topic, and create alliances, create networks, create synergies, create mutual inspiration. And over the last 5 years, at least in all the conversations I had with amazing people, I gave myself the best present. It was to have all these inspiring conversations. And I learned a lot. And I think we had many moments where we gave birth together to something bigger, that's like an emergence that happened through us in the conversations. And this was really beautiful and nourishing and also great, because it inspired all of us. And so we developed these amazing networks of great facilitators, scientists, trauma experts, social justice experts. And it was we became like a big family that are contributing to the deeper understanding of collective trauma. And so our goal was to really get the word out and create some buzz, create some interest. And I think individual, ancestral, and collective trauma healing are much more in the sphere. There are also many summits that are happening around this topic. So it's something that is vibrating and became a vibe in the air, in the collective air. And so now we feel that it's time to go to the next gear and say, okay, how can we deepen the conversation, which of course started already in the last years, and like, what can we do about it? And not only what can we do about it, but if we want to concretize our collective efforts to build more a collective architecture, a collective movement around healing. And so this year's summit definitely is more directed towards what are the ways how we can address collective trauma to turn it into restorative processes, to turn it into post-traumatic healing, to upgrade our or reconnect to our agency. Because I think in the moment we feel connected to our agency, our sense of hope changes. Hope isn't not anymore the thing in the future that we aspire to. Hope turns into a deep sense that we all have something great to contribute. That healing collective trauma is actually a collective healing movement, is the self-healing mechanism of life that is that wants to heal, and it needs the right circumstances or conditions. And I think we as a collective, in all the people that feel that they resonate with collective healing or healing in general, are basically the immune system of the global body and the global living system. And so when we create deep networks, when we inspire each other, and when we create the architecture, so different bodies of work and different levels of collaboration, I think that is an extremely powerful process. And we need to innovate. I think we need to create new jobs. We need to create a new architecture, new structures to facilitate a kind of a collective healing. And many people might say, listen, I mean, when I look into the world, there are so many potential crisis points, or people talk about the poly crisis and meta crisis, more and more stress factors around the world that seem to cohere to a big impact. And for many people, it closes in like the emergency of our crisis might be very imminent in our experience. And so we do need the practices and the skills, especially when maybe even through the trauma-informed movement, of course, resources grow, but also the anesthesia of trauma, like the trauma painkiller that helps us to be more numb, be more indifferent, be more disconnected from what's happening, which is on the one hand an important function in the trauma response, but on the other hand creates also a lack of interaction and a lack of agency and contribution to our world. And that's why certain things can continue. So as important that function also is in traumatic moments, as important it is also that we take care of it skillfully in a step-by-step way. And as that's melting, of course, the things that are happening in the world and the whole circumstances that we are in at the moment might feel even closer and might affect us deeper. And so that's also part of a growth experience. And so in the Collective Healing Conference, we want to give our kind of up-to-date contribution into the society and say, okay, where are we standing with this work? Because it's also, in a way, the conference of a movement. And it's we have amazing speakers that we will discuss a bit later with our interview hosts, and also the inspiration that we take away from, because we talk to many amazing people that often turn their own trauma into like a body of work that becomes a great contribution. And that's another, I think, hopeful message, not only that the collective cup, like when I have a small cup, I can put a little water into it. When I have a very large cup, I can put much more water into it. So collective healing is in a way to restore the cup, that we have more and more capacity to hold the experience, to experience the experience of what it means to be in life, to be alive, to live our life. And the more capacity we have to be in that experience, we call that presence, we call that relationality, we call that resilience, we call that aliveness and creativity. And so the more we restore the collective cup, we actually upgrade constantly our capacity to work on the collective trauma that we were born into. And I find this very hopeful, because together we have, first of all, an amazing impact, we have amazing power. But together, I think it's the time, I often say, it's the time where we know enough or too much about trauma not to take care of the legacy that we were born into. So not to take care of the condition, the precondition, the trauma precondition that we have been born into. So either we perpetuate that and pass it on to the next generations, or we take a portion of it and transform it into free life, potentiality, relationality, warmth, emergence, togetherness. And so I think that's the chance that we have. And the collective healing conference this year speaks through many, many different voices and experiences and workshops, and the exchange that we had, and also the engagement of everybody that listens to these conversations. It's an exploration of how we can turn this world into a more open, a wider, a more inviting, a more generous place than the one we found when we were born. And I think that's great, because that means we become more responsible, like more responding to the past where we come from. And we also become more responsible, responsive, able to respond to the future generations. And so how the ancestral information and the future generations meet in us and as us and design this world through this living moment is amazing, I think. And it's an amazing adventure. And it also gives us more and more skills, that collaboration, to melt the ice and to meet and to have the resilience and the post-traumatic learning to upgrade our maturity as humanity. And I think if we look into many places around the world, we see how regressive tendencies are often active in different ways. And I think if we can upgrade our maturity as humanity more and more and more, to be able to handle the technological and scientific and the whole the innovations that we are being handed over through our inspiration and innovation, and that we need to handle. So I think that maturity is needed. And that's why we invite many, many people into this open space to collaborate, to get to know, to create creative networks, to give their inspirations, and also to show how when we hear a lot of inspirational stories, how our own trauma became our remedy. So it means that what I experience as my hardship in my life actually can be turned into a blessing. I think that's very powerful and hopeful. And so I would love to invite our whole hosts, all of our hosts into this space. And I'll hand it back to you, Robin. I think I said enough. Let's discuss this and let's hear more voices. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. Very beautiful framing. I really like what you said also, that we know so much about trauma now, that there's a kind of ethical imperative to take what we know, what we become aware of, also through all the social media, the internet that provides us with lots and lots of information all the time. We know so much about it. Like, what is our responsibility? And I think that's going to be very much the flavor of our panel conversation. So let me introduce you to our panel. Ruby Mendenhall is a professor of sociology and African American studies, Associate Dean for Diversity and Democratization of Health Innovation at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. So welcome to you, Ruby. And Anna Molitor is a transformational coach and trauma healing practitioner, a group facilitator, and a senior student of Thomas's. Again, my name's Robin Alfred. I'm a trauma-informed coach, consultant, and facilitator, also a senior student of Thomas's. And it's maybe important to notice and be aware that there are two other conference hosts who you'll also be hearing from during the conference. So watch out for inspiring conversations with Kosha Joubert, the CEO of the Pocket Project, which is the NGO in the field of Thomas's work, dedicated to supporting the integration globally of collective and intergenerational trauma. And Maria Leister, who is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of the Pocket Project, and who is also on the faculty of Harvard Medical School's program in refugee trauma. So with Thomas as well, coming back into our frame, the four of us will have a panel conversation for about 40, 45 minutes or so. And Ruby, maybe you want to kick us off just with your reflections on what you noticed, what stimulated you, what inspired you in the interviews that you were part of.
Yes, happy to. Thank you. It is wonderful to be back here again today. And thank you, Thomas, for setting the context, right? Because we are in a poly crisis and there are many things going on, from the wars in various places, also to gun violence. And in the US recently had a mass shooting. So it's a lot to deal with, a lot to process. And I would say, actually, though, that talking to some of the individuals that I interviewed was really helpful, even in processing that. I always learn and I always grow when I do that. So two things that I think about after talking with the three people. One is they shared their journey from trauma and through the healing process, and then also the power of collective wisdom, and then also how they were now in a place to help heal others. So I'll talk a little more about that. And then also the importance of collective healing and what that looks like in terms of rituals, in terms of community, in terms of hope. And just in terms of the hope part and community, recently I was in Dallas, Texas, and I was able to sit through these 4 live singers each night, the place that I went to called Freeman's Cafe. And it was so beautiful. It was like joy, it was community, it was all of that. And I thought about, like, how do we bring this back to others? And then I'll just say, you've heard me talk for years about being a poet laureate. So actually this year I am. And I had an event and I brought in that singing Davion Williams, and it was just amazing. So I'm really interested in that part as collective healing. So Dr. Anita Sanchez, who specializes in Indigenous healing and is the author of 4 Sacred Gifts, she talked about Eagle Hope Prophecy, and then also gathering collective wisdom from 27 Indigenous elders. And the knowledge that came from that was forgiveness, unity, healing, and the importance of hope. So that was really transformative, as she actually did a healing ritual kind of during our conversation. So please, I encourage people to check that out. And then also Iya Afo, who's the founder of Heal Historical Trauma and Trauma Specialist. She talked about having depression as a child and kind of not sure what was going on, and then going through 30 countries and gathering collective wisdom from ancestors, from elders. And it was just beautiful how she talked about it and seeing her transformation. And then also Anu Gupta, he's the author of Breaking Bias, and he talked about neuroplasticity and the importance of taking perspective, breaking stereotypes and mindfulness, and then linked it to his own experience being Hindu, a gay immigrant in this country, and having feelings of depression, and almost to the point where he almost lost his life. He talked about being on his balcony and leaning forward, but instead of falling forward, he fell backwards. And that there was a friend there who was able to come to his house very quickly and work with him. So I talked about all that because they really let us into the sacred space of their wounds and even the border between life and death, and how even some of that wounding occurred in childhood. But then they also took us from the sacred, I would say, to the beautiful and the beauty of the gift of healing and how they were able to help others. And for me, again, there's this impatience in me, like how do we do healing on a mass scale? How do we alleviate some of the suffering, the intense pain, as I mentioned from the context, the wars and the shootings and other things. So, and I love the shift to focusing kind of on healing and creating this infrastructure. So I'll stop there, but that's what I kind of picked up, and that's my motivation and excitement about the next steps.
I can really feel your motivation and excitement. It's great. Thanks, Ruby, for kicking us off. We'll be sure to come back and reflect more with you on some of the themes that you raised. Anna, I wonder, do you want to chip in next?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love when you speak, Ruby. It reminds me of something that Sophie Strand, I wanted to bring in, that she shared in an interview, which was about kind of what she called the ecotone, which is where when one ecosystem radically shifts into another and there's kind of a boundary between them it's an actual space. And I'm feeling that also you brought in so much, and it's already interacting with what's inside me and with inside us and sparking something. Yeah, and she really talked about that in these edge places, it's where we have the most diversity and richness biologically, these fertile spaces. And that the word actually comes from two Greek words, ekos, which means household or home, or so a group of beings, and then tonos for tension. And so that, and about how we're living in these times where we're having a bit of trouble holding tensions and different ideologies, and that this ecotone is a space where tensions are held without being dissolved or homogenized. And so I think that's also when we talk about creating these healing spaces, that they're also spaces where everything is in, and we somehow have the resource to be in that space where there are tensions and stay together in them and learn how to really be in that alchemy that's happening. And so I also feel that this conference, and having watched this conference from the beginning of the summit, where it was so important to start to really see into the trauma more and to see how that was creating culture and creating so many harms and systems that we were a bit numb to. And now there's this movement into, I guess what's coming is like, what's the ecology of healing? What's in these ecotones between us, what is emerging in that radical growing meeting space. And so I feel that it's sort of the larger space of the conference holds so much of that. And then it holds that with those of you who are here going to be listening and are listening to us now, there's an ecotone between us in this moment. So we're here talking, but the real space is happening between us in the field with you as this conversation meets you. And so I just want to lift that up and also bring in something that I thought was really beautiful. Kai Cheng Tom spoke about, we can say, I want to be a part of something bigger. And maybe we mean that like something larger than me. And maybe we mean that kind of politically or ideologically. But what is the communal body, like the communal organism that we can feel, these as linked cells in a communal body? And I think, we'll speak more to that. And Ruby, you're speaking to like, what helps us to feel what's already true, that we are existing inside of something, that it's not just I'm an individual person trying to figure out how to heal something collective, right? We're existing inside something larger. that is moving in us, and how do we start to notice that communal body in a visceral, embodied way that provides movement also for the deep and painful work that we have to do sometimes too. So there's so much more, but I'll stop for now.
Yeah, it's lovely. Thanks, Anna. I was also thinking as you were speaking about tone, one of the things that came to me was it's a different kind of tone maybe, but how much is transmitted through the embodiment that the people who I interview, for example, really manifest. So I interviewed Dr. Albert Wong, right? He's like amazing. And as he's speaking, my whole nervous system relaxed because he's transmitting what he's talking about. So he's embodied in a way that's just soothing in itself. He's talking and my system goes, whatever you say, I just feel better already. Right. And that's kind of where it starts, right? It starts with can I embody? Am I talking about stuff or am I embodying it? And then I can transmit something energetically. There's a frequency that I can transmit. And that's the healing power. And we were talking earlier in the pre-conversation about the importance of relationship. Like it starts with that relationship. And if I can feel, and we had a beautiful practice. Interesting, you said, Ruby, also there were practices in your interview. So we did a little mindfulness practice conversation during the interview, where he was feeling me and I was feeling him, and we were noticing what we were noticing and speaking out that, and it was just so lovely, and it's so simple. So some of the healing tools, if you like, are very simple. We kind of know them. We know them from birth, right? We know them onwards, and we forget. And we think it's very complicated and we need to go to therapists. And there's a role for therapists, but there's also a role for just being human with each other and kind of resting in each other's presence. And then from there, it's a bit like the Russian dolls, like, with that sits inside a bigger movement, which sits inside a bigger movement, which sits inside a bigger movement. And then suddenly you've got 100,000 people doing something. But it starts very much, I think, on this kind of smaller relational piece. And just bridging from that to another interview I did with Dr. Stan Tatkin. Stan Tatkin is a relationship person, right? So he does a lot of work around secure functioning relationships. Beautiful. And he also popularizes some of the attachment theory into people being islands or waves or anchors. It's kind of very accessible. I really like it. But why he's doing his work is not just to support couples to have secure functioning relationship and what he calls creating a couple bubble, which means you prioritize the couple over everything else. So I'm well if my partner is well. It's got that kind of a flavor to it. But he's doing that work not just for that, important though that is, but because in his way of seeing the world, if we have more and more secure functioning couples, we start to build a secure functioning society. So it's not just like the individual work that's happening in the therapy room. We start to build a movement where there's more secure functioning people, and we start to build a kind of critical mass of secure functioning people. I thought he was a kind of quiet revolutionary in a way, because his vision is actually much bigger than I do couple work. And I found that in a number of people that I was interviewing. Yeah, we do the work here, we do the work one-to-one, or we do the work in groups, but there's a much bigger impact, there's a much bigger ecology that we're part of also, and that we're building together also. Yeah. Thomas, maybe you want to join the conversation with your reflections.
Yes, I want to chime in. First of all, I want to say that, and I think that's also one reason why we do the whole conference every year, is to what I just feel when I listen to the three of you. So when I listen to you, I feel you all inspired, excited. It feels like a flame has been turned on. And I think that's pretty much like how I also experienced many of the conversation I had. It's like it turns on a flame. And I think that's amazing because we all carry that flame inside. And if it gets kind of fueled, so then it becomes bigger. So I hear this when I listen to the three of you, I hear creativity, excitement, your own inspiration and creativity working and growing. So that's beautiful. And I think that's exactly the quality that we want to offer, that creative space, and that space that is inspirational. And then everybody can take it to wherever we impact society. So that's one thing. Another thing that, as I said before in my short intro, I feel because of that reason, I gave myself the biggest gift with creating these summits or conferences, because there are many inspirational moments. And this year, I also thought I'd talk to Dr. Judith Herman, just to give two examples, and Peter Levine. And during the conversations, I also felt, and there are others on the summit, where I feel that's the generation that actually pioneered a lot of the trauma work. So when 4 or 5 decades ago, not so many people were talking about trauma, there were some pioneers that actually opened the path or opened the way. And I felt through this, and I said that also, I felt through some of the conversations how important it is to honor the generations before us that really opened the door that we can already walk through. And of course, we can open more doors, but that honoring and even that bowing to the ones from which we learn and the ones from which we get, in a way, the blessing to continue a path is really beautiful. And that also creates like a tradition of healing. And since we are not the only ones that talk about healing, in many generations, in many cultures, there were always these elder circles that transmitted healing to the next generations. And it means that something becomes more ripe, that something becomes more mature, that we walk a path of initiation. And I think that's also one of the beauties of the summit is that from talking to the very young generation that is completely on fire and in activism and opening new doors, to getting the blessing from the former generations. I think that intergenerational dialogue, and we learn from both, like we learn in all directions. And I think if we can create such a creative learning environment, an intergenerational dialogue that is a healing dialogue, that's a beautiful quality as well. So I wanted to mention that. And then I wanted to mention also, I had a very lovely conversation with Alanis Morissette, and I find it amazing how people that are standing very much in the spotlight of society through their art or like their impact in the world, and at the same time, and I think Ruby, you said this also before, many of the people that we are in exchange during the conference with, there is a lovely quality and maturity of holding one's own wounds in a very mature transparency. So there's like when the masks kind of melt away, and then there is this authentic nakedness with like who we are as human beings, what we struggle with, what are our wounds, what is our healing. And that healing is not just that things disappear that we struggle with, but they are being held in a different way. And that as a leader in an organization, or that as a parent, or that as a partner, as an intimate partner, it's beautiful to come to that deeper authenticity and transparency. So when we stop hiding a lot of ourselves, and when it's being held in a different openness, I think that also creates like a restoration in the interpersonal space. And I experienced that from many of the conversations, that there is a beautiful authenticity and availability in the conversation. So there are so many more things I could say, but I want to highlight these two qualities: the intergenerational dialogue and the authenticity with who we are, with all our like 360 degrees.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Thomas. So we're now just going to jump in. Anybody wants to build on whatever's been said so far or come back with a second bite, we'll unmute and just start to speak into the space.
Well, actually, Thomas, you know what, when you talked about the next generation, right, and how they're on fire and how they're advocates, I was recently in a meeting with someone, we were talking about using artificial intelligence, right? And he was like, I want to use artificial intelligence to save lives, right? Not just to make pretty pictures. And I thought about, as we're talking about collective healing, collective wisdom, right? In many ways, AI, ChatGPT is offering us something in terms of the collective, although many voices are missing, right? I do research on people of color, people on the margins of society aren't there, but there is something, and I wonder, can it hold answers in terms of healing humanity, right? So we talked about the context and the different wars and the gun violence, and what wisdom do we need to bring those things to an end? And with the new generation and their use of technology and their use of collective wisdom in ways we probably don't even know yet, right? Especially those of us who are older. I just thought about that as you talked, and also the importance of bringing the young generation with us, younger generation with us as we heal, and to tell them about our wounds. And as you say, sometimes the wounds aren't gone, right? Like there's a holding there. We found a community that helps, and that's a balm. So that came to mind when you talked about the young people, whom I love working with them.
Anna, go on.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to pick up on this theme of we have our wounds, and then we start to, I think you expressed it really beautifully, Thomas, like how people are becoming more and more transparent about that and kind of able to speak to that, and how the wounds become a gift. And that as we heal, there's a kind of natural impulse to want to give back. There's a kind of agency that starts to come online as we heal. And I'm also with this question, not so much about the young generation at the moment, but more about the groups that enable that to happen. So one person I interviewed is Fleet Mall, and Fleet Mall had a rough start, let's say, and a rough life. So he was imprisoned. He was very open about this in the interview for drug-related work for many years. He was incarcerated for many years, and moved from the States into Mexico, got involved in kind of drug smuggling, used his time to develop his inner self. So he became a Zen Roshi, actually, through his kind of prison experience, and now gives back like manifold, like in so many different ways. And one of the things he does is leads bearing witness retreats. So he takes people to Auschwitz or to Rwanda, Palestine, other places. And what was very touching for me, firstly, is his own personal journey, and then what he embodies again and transmit in how he speaks about it, but also the very precise and caring way of building a group so that the group becomes a healing vessel that can then go and bear witness. So you don't just kind of sign up and jump on a bus and go to Auschwitz. You kind of sign up, and then you spend time like developing an understanding of presence, developing an understanding of your triggers, developing an understanding of where you might get activated and how you might be with that, developing an understanding of where you might become numb and having compassion for that. So you do a lot of kind of inner work, not on your own, but also with a group. And then the group becomes the vessel of which you are a part that bears witness. And then the bearing witness has its own fruits. And I just feel that there's something very archetypal in a way about that journey. It starts with a wounding, you become a healer, then you start to build a kind of healing architecture with groups of people, and you give back. And it's just very touching to me to witness that so fully in somebody like him and his work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I wanted to go back to something, Thomas, when you were speaking about, the earlier generations that brought in trauma healing work in a certain form. I was also I am feeling a lot further generations back, and how, so I want to bring in something that Sophie Strand was talking about, how we learn sensory gating as children. We learn to gate things out so we can focus and distinguish things. And so that, a long time ago, we would have gated out certain things so that maybe we could recognize plants and animals and distinguish weather patterns. And now we're gating out the sounds of birds and what that plant is and the myriad life richness of life that's actually I'm in and is a part of me. So she spoke about what's thinking me, the whole ecosystem that is thinking me and that I'm embedded in, and that this concept of self is just a very, very small part of what we actually are. And so I'm also feeling into the ancestry of peoples who did not gate out all that information and had more relationship with a whole ecosystemic world that is rich with learning about how to be human, actually. That many cultures learned how to be human from the depth of connection with the wider than human world. And that is a part of what we're needing now, is that in a way, in the trauma healing work, I also feel we're melting some of the gating, we're melting some of the narrowing that we've had through, and that's through individual trauma, but that's very much through collective traumas that have happened to us and have narrowed our perception and our capacity to relate to life. And so I'm also thinking, and just honoring the cultures that have maintained that more maybe than some of our hyper-individualized, hyper-rational Western cultures, and that through great struggle, they have kept some of that sacred and alive still and are nourishing and reviving that, as those of us in the more westernized mind are melting back into that capacity more. And that is a collective process. It needs to be a collective process. And I just wanted to say back, Robin, when you said that the people we spoke with, they're embodying something that's such a transmission. I also felt that with Sophie when she was speaking. It's like it lit up in me even more of I've been noticing it ever since, like my noticing when I'm gating out life and the world, or the feelings of other people, or the ways that we've limited so much of our perception, and what does it mean when we open that back up, and then we transmit that into our environment, lighting that up for other people. And then it's like, okay, if we're feeling each other and our ecosystem, our world, the natural world, the aliveness of life so much more, we're also feeling the hurt more. And then again, we come back to this question of how do we, that's a good movement, and it's overwhelming for some of us. And so then we come again to the collective body that can resource and also through music and dance and togetherness and collective ritual, find a way through that together. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, Anna, because I think that's so important, what you said about feeling more. Because one of the things that I also noticed in a number of interviews, and also talking with Kosha about the interviews that she did, is about grief work. There was a lot of people talking about grief work. And Martin Prechtel, for example, is someone who talks a lot about grief work and how there's so much grief, and how we grieve, even we really need to grieve, even like the transitions from different stages in life. So there's a grief when we really tune in. And some of the indigenous cultures are more familiar with doing this, let's say, but when we tune into the grief of leaving the womb, there's a loss in that, and a grief of childhood, and then you leave childhood, and then there's a grief of kind of leaving home. So these stages of life are also accompanied by a grief, because there's a loss in that. And to make space for that, and a number of people are also talking about the need to create collective grieving spaces. Because grief, if we don't grieve, then we kind of move a little bit from kind of problem to solution. But we feel it, and then we want to grieve because we care, because we love. And so there's a movement into grief. And then through the grief comes something else, comes joy, movement, agency, and everything else. Francis Weller talks about grief as a gateway emotion. It's a gateway emotion. And we need to learn, I think, how to consciously grieve. And that's also a flavor that I think is also with, as you said earlier, Thomas, with the polycrisis being kind of more pressing in a way, the need to grieve more fluidly, frequently is also increasing, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation about grieving, right? Because as we talked about all the things that are happening in the world, and when you look at them, right, your heart breaks, right? And you grieve with everyone who has been affected, and the sensory gating, right, and kind of gatekeeping. How much do you let in and be consumed and feel and hurt and pain and anger and all of that. And I think about the mothers who I work with who've lost their children to gun violence, and how the grief, right, it stays with them, and it is so intense. I didn't realize how intense it was, and I listened to them talked about feeling like your stomach has been ripped out of your body, right, and different ways. And I thought about, like, as a society, and I'll just say in the US, that we don't really have language around even letting people describe how physical and emotionally painful grief is. And so when I think about, again, this collective healing and having spaces to both feel it, right? Because things are happening and they should be felt, and you should grieve with others, and often that motivates you to act. But then where can you go to kind of get the healing so that you can survive, right? And that you aren't consumed with it. And I mentioned earlier about this proposal that we did, the Collaborative for Optimal Black Wellness, wanting to do healing circles in 10 cities and working with 1 million Black people around the importance of coming together in community. And as she said, using what we know from the ancestors, from the elders, how we are still here in this country and around the world. So I think grief is really important. And as we think about healing, what does that look like? And having people be able to express it, because often too, sometimes the how can we say it, people's ability to hear the pain that's behind the grief is limited. And so people who are grieving in the depths of it, they feel like there's no place to go and no one to talk to often.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Ruby. That you speak to that. First of all, it's a great project. I think it's a great movement towards these collective healing spaces, because especially in the West, we isolated sometimes healing into therapy rooms. And I think, of course, that's important. That is important. And sometimes we need these safe spaces to really go through something. But in my experience, what is even more powerful is to create these collective architectures of which these rooms, the therapy rooms, are part of, but they are not separate. They are not like here and here is the collective. So we build a healing collective, as you just described, and it's an ecosystem. And imagine because we often look at human beings very separate, like as an individual is like a cup, it's like something in like a separate. And then there is the rest of life, versus we are all life. And this changes a bit, like that we are always swimming in life. And what we throw into the ecosystem, let's say into the water that we are part of, is going to have a rebound effect onto us, obviously. So, which means that seeing the ecosystem as part of the healing space in the one-on-one therapy room, in the classroom, in the medical field, in whatever, in the parenting process, I think all of that ecosystemic upgrade and the individual healing need to go hand in hand. They have an infinity loop between, like this relationality that's interwoven. It's called also interdependence. And so when we think of, and that's, I think, also where we want to go with the conference, is also to say, okay, how can we all contribute to a holistic model of healing that speaks left? That's not only, there are professionals needed, but there are many other tiers in society needed to be trauma informed and to hold certain spaces that can be held by us as a collective. And professionals and complex trauma needs to be treated in special ways, and that we all know that that's important. But it is not separate. And so I love that. And that's also a little bit what Anna, what you said with the gating. I think we have been born into a certain ecosystem that has properties that we normalize. And these normalized functions or processes or properties need to be examined and see, okay, what is actually really healthy and connected to life, and what is emergent, and what is actually stuck in these repetitive processes that do not evolve. And and to create an ecosystemic awareness, which means all of us are being called to be part of that healing space. Because everybody, it doesn't matter if I'm a parent, if I'm a teacher, if I'm a grandmother or a grandfather, if I'm like wherever I am active, I have an influence that is important. It's not just the big projects or the big competencies that are important. And I think that's what your project also speaks to as one example. But I think that's also what some of the speakers at the conference spoke to. And I think that's an important quality to see that the toxins in the ecosystem affect all of us, and taking care of the toxins in the ecosystem affects all of us. So we all create a healthier fabric of life. And then we can all be healthier. Like Gabor Mate speaks in his recent book, The Myth of Normal, also about how can you be healthy in an unhealthy environment. And so I think that's for all of us an important question. How do we create more awareness of the ecosystem and contribute in different ways to that ecosystem to make it healthier? Yeah, that's beautiful. It's ecosystemic health.
Yeah. I love that. And then even across generations, right? You started talking about the younger people up to our seniors, all of them as part of the solution to the healing that's needed. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that reminds me also of just something that Kai-Cheng Tom was speaking to about, yeah, I mean, she said, you know, she's a trans woman, a racialized identity also. And so she's saying, I'm speaking from a place where I have experienced violence and oppression and all of that, and also acknowledging that she has some resources and privilege of home and economic security and things like that. So to speak from a place of what she wants and means to do is to never let go of the sacredness of the other. And she spoke to it being so understandable that people who, in the wake of collective trauma, persecuted or oppressed people, you know, would want to or need to stop feeling and stop connecting to the oppressor, right? And then she said, but what I know is you can't put out fire with fire. You have to put out fire with water. And so she speaks from this beautiful place of saying, you know, it shouldn't be up to oppressed people to be bringing, you know, the love for the oppressor, and at the same time her own perspective. Some of us are called to that. And I think she's speaking to this radical or revolutionary love, which is not new. I mean, and she also said, like, this has been with us for so long, but what does it actually take to embody that in a fierce way also, and in our relationships, in our neighborhoods, in our families? How do we practice that where we like embodying the politics of love? We're not going to get anywhere if we don't know how to hold on to each other's humanity, right? And so it really is also looking at what's happening in our bodies when we're confronted by things that are scary, and violence and fear and things like that. And she had a beautiful practice. She's referenced the Rumi poem of out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And what is it like if that field is in my body? Like, what is it like? Where is that? What does that feel like? If I carry this space inside where people can, everywhere I go, that souls can be seen and held in their humanity, and my practice of humanizing others as a collective practice also, especially when it's the hardest.
Yeah, lovely. And then what you talk about the body, like how many people now also understand the need to embody and the need to feel, and again, Albert Wong, who I interviewed, talks about expanding mindfulness into bodyfulness and heartfulness. It's very lovely, because he said we can be mindful, but we can still do, you know, if the mindful practice is not embodied, we're missing the kind of body intelligence, we're missing the body resonance. If it's not heartful mindfulness, so mindfulness becoming heartfulness also, then we're missing the compassion. So sometimes we kind of practice mindfulness as a kind of quick fix of something, but mindfulness needs to kind of drop down the levels into heartfulness, bodyfulness, and he talks about relatefulness also. So we're back into the relational field. And then the mindfulness has a much broader canvas and a much stronger impact, and a much stronger movement comes out of mindfulness. And I found that also in a few interviews, that people were taking kind of basic concepts, let's say, and expanding them into something. So I like this expansion into, let's say, in this case, heartfulness and bodyfulness and relatefulness. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And just to echo what you say about the importance of noticing what we feel in the body gives us a lot of information. And more people, I think, are feeling that that's a kind of literacy which is being developed at scale now. Can also really feel.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you said. It's a literacy, because we cannot go, and it's also what you said, Ruby, before, like we cannot go with anybody deeper than we can go into ourselves. So it's not just I can read many books, and of course that's important, but how much I can listen to somebody who is deeply grieving, as you said about the mothers before. Like I need a resonance, an inner resonance body for that. And I think developing that embodied trauma literacy, that is a practice, and that's a way, because that's not something we can just read somewhere and apply. That's something that we need to become. And we need to walk our talk, and we need to deal with our own wounds when we want to do that, and find the right pacing for that, depathologize our own interior world. And I think that's a beautiful but also challenging journey. It's not a romantic journey. It's like really taking this deeper into application really is a lifelong path. And I think that's also why I love this, like two thoughts. Like one is like sometimes hope is a necessary defense mechanism. When we are hurt, then we need something in the future that's better. And I think there's one hope that is actually part of a disembodied function, that the later it's going to be better. And then there is another form of hope, which is that I'm either connected or reconnected to the agency, the capacity that I feel, the capacity that I can form and influence life, and I can build something in life. I have an agency to contribute to the world. And that gives us a different kind of hope. And especially when we started a conversation also with there is a polycrisis, it might be disheartening for many people and feel like, oh, wow, it doesn't make any sense. It's so much, it's so big. What can I do? But when I'm connected to the agency, and then I see other people being connected to their agency together, there's a hope in the capacity to contribute something. And that's also a very important resource in the trauma work. And the other point I just remembered was the conversation with Marco Lambertini, who speaks a lot about nature positive impact. Like, and that relates also to what you just said before about the embodiment. I think if we melt the dualism between humans and nature, that we see we are nature. It's not that nature is around us and we are here. It's like we are also nature. My body is nature, and our bodies are nature. So that nature positive, then the relationship to the biodiversity. And I think a lot of grief is also about a rapidly diminishing biodiversity. I think that dualism also has severe consequences in the regulation of the biosphere of life. And getting more embodied, as you just said, Robin, is also a way to heal that rift and implement more and more regulation feedback loops in the biosphere, which means more and more people are coming back to like a nature positive way of living, not a biodiversity degrading way of living. And it doesn't matter if that's business, if that's how I live my life, if that's how we create international structures, and how we harvest resources in the world. So I think that's also a very important part of understanding collective trauma, is in the dualism between humans and nature. And in some cultures that's way more connected still, but in some cultures we're pretty disconnected from from that sense, and I think that shows heavy effects. So yeah, so I think that's also why embodiment is so important.
Yeah, just mindful of the time now. I think we have about another 4 or 5 minutes for this. So maybe if anybody has some last thoughts or pieces you want to bring in that you haven't yet spoken to, this is a good time for that.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking is, Thomas, when you talked about hope, right? And also Dr. Sanchez talked about it in the sacred gifts and what is hope. And I appreciate how you talked about it in 2 phases, right? Because as again, in the poly crisis, and you turn on the TV and you think, what can you do? And I ask myself personally over and over, what are we missing as humans? Like, what are we missing in terms of our ability to recognize everybody's humanity? What are we missing? So sometimes I'm both hopeful and hopeless, right? Like, and you look and you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like it's not here. But the hopeful part does come when you think about the collective, and that there are many people who are looking for the humanity, who are looking for the peace, and how do we come together? And I think, Thomas, your ecosystem that you've created is really avenue, and it's an architecture for that. People from around the world, different backgrounds coming together, asking that question, like, how do we keep humanity sacred? So
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Ruby. Anna?
Yeah, I'm thinking, Thomas, when you're speaking about the embodiment and what we've been speaking about, that, it's like the beauty of aliveness and living, and the sacredness of it and the feeling of that lives in the same place as the pain and the grief. So to come home, to this body, to be embodied, means both. And so when the pain has been so intense that we've had to leave, again, I'm just sitting in the questions of, how do we recover this possibility of feeling the beauty and the nourishment in relationship with each other, in and as the natural world that is so nourishing and beautiful when we can allow that in? How are we opening up individually and collectively our capacity to receive each other, to receive the land, to actually feel the incredible abundance that is still here, that means I can eat every day, that I, like the world is sustaining me in such profound ways. And how do we, ungate like open the gates to receive nourishment, so that I can feel the grief deeply, so that I can allow the grief of how you're hurting and the earth is hurting, but is also beautiful, and that you're hurting and also you have love flowing through you, and you are an incredible being that I can appreciate. And so thinking of how, Martine Prechtel speaks to this too, that grief is love. So this depth of grief is also that I love and have loved and am loving. And then that love that becomes grief when something is happening that is harmful, that love is also a wellspring, and it's ever here. And that we're creating cultures and spaces where that's more and more apparent and safe and possible to feel that too. So that everything can be, again, more in, and we can be in the creativity together and the nourishment of coming up with ways that we do a lot less harm and a lot more good for each other and the earth.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm very touched by this conversation about grief, and it keeps sparking different memories in me. So one is of the late great teacher Sobonfu Some from Burkina Faso, and she used to say that in her country, the one shrine that was always within a 20-minute walk of wherever you were was the grief shrine, because she said there's such a need to kind of unload our grief constantly. And that's why I'm reminded of that. And I'm also reminded of this wonderful poem of David Whyte's. I know you interviewed Thomas for the summit this time again. And he writes this beautiful poem, The Well of Grief. And he says, those who will not slip beneath the still waters on the well of grief, turning down through the black waters to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink. And that's like such a beautiful, eloquent way of describing that journey. Like, if we don't slip beneath the still waters on the well of grief, we won't get to the still water, the clear water from which we drink. And it's such an eloquent expression of that. And somewhere there's a choice, like Fleetwood also talked about radical responsibility and choice. And in a way, there's a choice to also slip beneath the still waters on the well of grief. There is a choice moment also. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should sadly wrap this up, but it's been a fantastic conversation, and pass on to you, Thomas, for a little bit more of your own personal reflection on the themes of the conference, and maybe you want to guide us in a meditation together or something to integrate our time. You need to unmute at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to all of you, Anna, Ruby, Robin, Kosha, Maria, all the hosts that make this conference so lively and interesting. And yes, I think one thing, like one maybe last thought about the content, and then well, let's do a short practice, because I think there's so many practices throughout the conference, and so there's such a resource of practices for all kinds of different situations and circumstances that we collected, that also gives everybody like something practical and applicable in everyday life. Obviously, it's not just theory and talking. And so there's an experiential part to the whole conference that's important, as we said, because the embodiment is important. I just want to say one last thing that we touched on a little bit throughout the time, but I think, as first of all, collective trauma needs collectives to heal it. And I think we talked about that. But it also means that everybody who feels drawn, I mean, there are people who feel drawn to different disciplines and different fields. Obviously, it's not just one ways, it's many ways. But how we create an architecture, because there is no collective healing architecture yet. There is no architecture where citizenship means I know that part of responsible, mature citizenship is that I and we will take care of the legacy that we were born into. Because if we don't do it, we will repeat some of it. And I think once we know that, then we cannot just say, okay, let's leave it behind and let's just look forward. That's not, because we are not looking back in time, we are looking back into ourselves. That the unresolved past is active in us. It's not that it's there and it's kind of laying around somewhere. No, it affects our choices, it affects our relationships, it affects our workplaces, it affects our society, it affects our racial communities. It's like how we are together in communities is affected every moment by the stuff that we don't look at. So we can't just continue like that. That's not responsible. And we know too much, and we know too much from science and wisdom traditions and indigenous traditions to carry on like that. So having and developing a collective architecture is a multidisciplinary process. And that means also policies, that means structures, that means collaborations with governments, government institutions, different pillars of our society. So that means global structures, global architecture. And I think many people that are interested in this work, and that we touched almost 500,000 people over the last few years with this, through the summits and this work. So there is a high level interest also in people from different disciplines to build that architecture, but we need to build it. And I think one wish for us is also with this conference to say, okay, how can we have an impact that we lay the ley lines and the steps for an architecture that then can continue to be developed. And that needs a lot of innovation. That also needs a lot of new creativity and workplaces that will develop that, and that will become that structure in society, so that our societies will become healing societies and flourishing societies. And I think everybody's creativity is called into that, because that's collective intelligence. And there is an organizing principle that we can all draw from, I think, that brings innovation to all of us. And I love, Ruby, that you're so creative, and as an artist and a poet, and you love music and dance, and I think all that creativity is also part of bringing something new into the world. And so that's also a call to everybody who feels like, oh, I feel I'm part of creating such an architecture. And then it's a collective endeavor to bring it into the world, all around the world. So it's and we are doing our part, and I think there are many other groups and movements around the world. So a lot of exciting stuff is also happening as we speak. So that's great. And then let's have a short meditation, because something that is often undervalued in our, at least in the more Western career-driven society, is space, and having space to digest. And when we talk about trauma healing, we're also talking about digesting. And then our beloved Kim Rosen will bring us some amazing poetry. I always love the summits and the conferences, because that's when Kim also gifts us with her beautiful magical words and music. So that's lovely. But before we listen to the music of poetry, let's listen to ourselves for a moment and say, okay, if we listened now almost an hour, a bit more than an hour, to my conversations, impressions, creativity, and now we let it come back to every one of us. And we just make some space. And say, okay, if you reconnect to your own inner world and you just feel your breath, your body, a lot about embodiment. So let's take a breath and let's let the exhalation guide you deeper into your body sensations. Notice how you're sitting and feeling, sitting in your body, feeling your body, the level of stress or relaxation. And then to see how parts of the conversation resonate with you more, maybe than others. But see what lands in you, what speaks to you, your life, your work. And also your sense of agency, like the fact that your impact in this world matters, your daily relationships, your daily actions, decisions, interests, creativity, curiosity, but also absence, indifference, not acting. Everything matters. And how that creates an ecosystem. How every one of us is an individual, but is also an ecosystem and creates an ecosystem. So we are creating the water that we are living in, the relational, societal waters we are living in. we are drinking, breathing, we call world. And then in this more contemplative space, like when we are more connected to the body, more relaxed, more spacious, reflective, digesting. Let's connect to one thing that you feel grateful for currently in your life. Just one thing. And to tune in with this one thing that you're grateful for, even if there might be also challenges and all kinds of things that are disturbing. But let's find one thing and to feel the gratitude for whatever that is, a person in your life, situations, nature, anything, things that are happening in your life. And to feel that emotion of gratefulness in your body. Maybe in this reflective space, Kim, you can lead us to, I don't know, Robin, if there's anything from you. But if not, then maybe we hand it over to you, Kim. And I love your poetry, so I'm looking forward.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I am so grateful for this conversation, which feels so fertile and real. Thank you, Robin and Ruby and Anna also. And one thing I am most grateful for are the moments of realness, of intimacy that arise in my own life. And many of those, for me, come through poetry, which I experience some poems as a kind of non-denominational prayer or an invocation. I think of these poems as having a sacred technology, which some people call poetic craft, that is designed to disarm the mind and disrupt patterns of holding in our bodies and render us undefended, intimate with ourselves and others, open to the flow of our feelings and the flow of wisdom that may come through beyond the patterns of our daily thoughts. So I offer this poem by the Palestinian-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye, which I will speak to this beautiful music you can hear already by Jami Sieber. The name of this poem is Kindness. And as I offer it, I invite you to dwell in the root of the word kindness, which means the same as kin or kinship or kindred, which means connected with, related to, of the same nature, of the same family. Families that perhaps go beyond even what we know of as family, or even who we know in our own personal circles. Maybe that kindredness goes to touch other cultures, other places we've never been. It certainly goes to touch the generations who came before and the descendants who are coming after us. This is the poem Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye, with music by Jami Sieber. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go before you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you know the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel to where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead at the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for." And then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go before you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. Before you know the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel to where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead at the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore, only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for. Then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. A poem called Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye and music by Jami Sieber. You can find the credits for the poetry and music when this video is posted. And now I hand it back to Robin for some closing announcements. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kim. So beautiful. And such a poem to kind of weave together many elements in our conversation also. And I just want to honor, like we were talking before, about how it's about embodiment and how much you really embody and transmit the poems that you bring to us. So thank you so much for that. Such a gift for us. Yeah, and thank you to Ruby and Anna for the panel conversation, and to Thomas, and for sharing some of your learnings, your passions for the conference ahead. And thank you, Thomas, for also, of course, instigating and convening the conference. Huge gift, we hope, to all of you and to all the people who are touched by you, because as you said earlier, Thomas, like everything matters. So everything matters. So also what you think, what you consume, what you read, what you talk, it all matters. So we hope that the conference will inspire you in many, many different ways. And how does it work? Well, the live broadcast of the conference begins on Tuesday, September 24th. It lasts for 8 days. Each day of the conference will feature 5 or more new talks, and each of those talks is available for 48 hours to stream for free. So if you'd like access to the conference or the free talks, please register at collectivehealingconference.com. And we will then email you with the speaker lineup each day. Please tell other people about the conference. Also, anyone can join at any time throughout the event. So it's not uncommon that people join through the 8 days. So keep spreading the word if you feel it's of value to people that you know. We also invite you to upgrade your experience with, as I said at the beginning, our All Access Pass, which features 9 additional live workshops with luminaries like Thomas, Gabor Mate, Ruby Gibson, Dan Siegel, David White, bioaccumulate, many others also. So there are 9 workshops which you can get access to with the All Access Pass, and you will also then receive unlimited access to all the talks, transcripts, and exclusive bonus gifts from our speakers. So you get all of that with the All Access Pass. And of course, you'll be joining, and not just joining, but helping to create, as we talked about earlier, a global community that is dedicated to growth, connection, a healing movement. Simply click the link in the chat to learn more. The conference's partner organization is the Pocket Project, a non-profit organization and global initiative that aims to restore the fragmentation in our communities and societies by addressing and supporting the integration of collective and intergenerational trauma. And you can learn more about the Pocket Project by visiting their website, pocketproject.org. And finally, we have some exciting preview clips coming soon from interviews with the conference speakers, and we'll be emailing you with access to those as well. So once more, thank you so much for joining us. You already start to become part of the healing movement that we're all building together just with your attendance today and your presence. So thank you for joining us. We really look forward to seeing you during the conference. We trust your journey through the conference will be rewarding, insightful, maybe even a healing time for you and for your loved ones and for your communities. And thanks again for being with us today, and bye-bye for now.